Hello everyone, welcome to another video. It's been some time and I'm going to give you a quick guide on the build that I'm currently using for PoE 2. It absolutely destroys bosses in the acts, and I have been using a bow from Act 4 and doing still pretty decent into the early maps. The main skill we will be using is the classic lightning arrow and lightning rod combo. It's a 2-button build now, and first we use lightning rod and shoot lightning arrow through them to proc their damage even more, because the lightning will chain onto the rods. In addition, we will be proccing Herald of Thunder as well. For a single target, we will be using Rain of Arrows, crush the bosses during the acts. Originally, I wanted to play with grenades as a Deadeye, but I settled on lightning arrow and lightning rod combo because I started with it, and the passive tree and attribute requirements of the skills made it kind of awkward to transition into crossbow, so I just kept using the lightning arrow and lightning rod. So far it has been an absolute blast, and hope you enjoy the build. So I have made a detailed guide on Mobalytics you can check out. I will drop the link in the description. Here is the guide, and I will be updating this as I go through the end game as well. This guide is for beginners and hopefully it will help you guys through the acts. The main skill we will be using is the lightning arrow as written here, and the lightning rod as well. We will be using Rain of Arrows once we have the levels to absolutely destroy bosses, because usually the bosses in the campaign have huge hitboxes, and using Rain of Arrows we can pretty much land all the arrows onto the boss and it will kill the boss instantly. So in the early game, we will be using Lightning Arrow combined with Pierce and Martial Temple. Martial Temple will increase the attack speed and makes the Lightning Arrow feel much better. These will be the two links. And for the Lightning Rod, you will use Scatter Shot, so it shoots 3 lightning rods onto the ground instead of 1. And this will help cover more areas. And later on, we can use Conduction and Cursing Current to increase the shock chance and shock nearby enemies. In addition to Lightning Arrow and Lightning Rod, we will be using Freezing Salvo in the early game, and as soon as you get the skill Freezing Salvo, you should link it with Hourglass, which makes it have 10-second cooldown, but the skill is recharging its missiles anyway, and we should be using Freezing Salvo off cooldown to increase our DPS. This is a big DPS increase on bosses as well, since it can freeze the boss. And afterwards, we can use Rain of Arrows as well. This will become our main bossing skills once we acquire the levels. The first link would be Concentrated Effect to make the area of effect smaller. This way, the Rain of Arrows will shoot into a smaller area and have a better chance to hit the boss. The aura we'll be using in the early game will be Herald of Thunder linked with Lightning Infusion. This will cause the attacks to gain even more lightning damage once you proc Herald of Thunder. And in addition to the this buff, we can also use Wind Dancer. This is a defensive buff that gives more evasion and will push back enemies if they're too close. If you have the Spirit, once you get enough Spirit to the acts, we can use Clarity and Cannibalism support on the Wind Dancer to help us sustain our life and mana. For Rain of Arrows, it has a special interaction with Frenzy Charges, and in order to generate Frenzy Charges, we can use Sniper's Mark. And once we acquire the Frenzy Charges, we use Rain of Arrows, and it will shoot even more projectiles. That's pretty much the basics for the skills, and I will be updating this page as I go on. Okay, so let's take a look at the passive tree. This is what the passive tree looks like. Basically, for the axe, we're going to be traveling through this part over here. In my opinion, the tree in PoE 2 doesn't have as much flexibility as in PoE 1. It feels like we're just taking all the damage nodes, and this is exactly what we're doing here in the early game, which gives a percent chance to Pierce, and Pierce works very well with Lightning Arrow. Then in addition to that, we have this one that helps increase our damage. If in the early game you're able to find a very good quiver with flat damage, or something like flat damage and attack speed, I would rush this node. Basically, these points will give you 80% more bonus gain from your quiver. It will be a very good DPS increase if you have a good quiver. Other than that, we're taking pretty much all the damage nodes here, the penetrating lightning resistances, elemental damage per element, similar to here as well. So 25% increased damage with hits against enemies affected by elemental elements. Same thing here. And then afterwards, we take here for doing more damage when enemies are closer. This will work with our ascendancy as well. Other than that, here we have increased shock magnitude and some mana regen to help you sustain your mana. And here just generic attack damage. Then we're going to rush the pierce node over here, which will help with our lightning arrow pierce even more targets. Later on, as you level up, I would suggest rushing over left side of the tree, because we really want to have this node over here, lightning rod, which says that the lightning damage with non-critical hits is lucky. In the early game, it is very difficult to scale crit chance, and having this node will increase your DPS significantly, because the lightning damage in PoE has a very big variation between the low damage and the high damage. This node will roll the damage twice, so you will have a better chance of hitting the high rolls on the lightning damage. Other than that, this part will be generic damage nodes that you should take. That's pretty much it for the tree. Alright, moving on to the equipment. So what we're looking for throughout the acts is that you should pick up blue and yellow gear to disenchant them into currency for crafting, and pick up the quality superior gear and also gear with sockets to salvage with the hammer to get currency for crafting and putting sockets on whatever equipment you need as well. In addition, if you're struggling early game, you can also check the vendors for potentially good items. They will carry blue items and rare items, and every time you level up, their inventory will refresh and you can take a look. I don't always check them, but when I needed an upgrade, I would try to check them when I have time. As a last resort, you can use gold to gamble gear. This I used a couple of times during the acts in order to get a better equipment such as armor, boots, and gloves. I've also used it to get rings, since I feel like in the acts, rings are really difficult to get. Overall, in the end game, what you're looking for on gear is very simple. What you want is the highest DPS bow as much as possible. I'm using currently a physical bow. I will show you guys the gear I have currently later on. But what you want to prioritize are flat damage, such as added physical damage and percent physical damage on your bow, and something like attack speed. In addition to that, for the quiver, you want to have the highest roll of the flat damage as high as possible, and something like attack speed will also help with your DPS. And the quiver is quite important because we have the cluster on the passive tree that gives 80% more increased effect of the quivers. Because our defensive layer is mostly based on evasion, so we use evasion gear to increase our overall evasion rating. On gear, we should prioritize our resistances to try and max out our resistances at 75. And also, I think in the late game, you should also have chaos res maxed as well. In the early maps, I felt like a lot of monsters dealt chaos damage, so that should become a priority as well. You should note that if you need some attributes such as int, you would need to get it on your amulet or rings, because the evasion bases will only roll dex. Alright, I'm going to show you guys a quick look at my current character. I'm currently level 73, and it's definitely not min-max yet. I have just trying to push maps right now. I'm using a fizz bow right here. It has a lot of physical damage, and I have slammed, I believe, the elemental damage with attacks. This is a bow that I have since Act 4. You can see the item level is pretty low. It's item level 48. I've had this bow since Act 4, and I'm looking to get an upgrade for this. Similarly, we have a quiver that has a tier 8 cold damage and tier 6 fire damage and tier 4 attack speed. This provides quite a lot of DPS as well. Other than that, as I mentioned before, we're using evasion gear mostly, and try to max our res. Currently, I barely max my res at 75 fire, 75 lightning, and 65 cold. I'm going to try and get better chaos res as I go. Just going to quickly show you guys the gear I have. This is just generic gear. You can use runes to boost your resistance that you're lacking, and I think it is pretty good addition to the game. It is basically the crafting bench from PoE 1. On boots, you should also look for movement speed. Usually when I start struggling in maps, I will look into upgrading my gear. So far I haven't had any trouble. So far I haven't had any trouble at all. Alright, that concludes this short guide. As mentioned before, I will keep updating this guide, so keep an eye out on it. Hopefully I have provided you with the tools to succeed in this quite difficult game. I believe GGG will make the changes necessary to make this a great successor to PoE 1, and I am looking forward to it. I'll be streaming most of my progress on Twitch during the evening, so if you have trouble or any questions, feel free to drop by and I will gladly help you out. As always, thank you guys for watching and see you guys next time.